Okay. Right, everybody, we're good to go. Thank you for coming today, to all those members of the public who've chosen to come and join us at this meeting in public of the two governing bodies, South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for bearing with us while we got the extra chairs in, and I hope that doesn't mean we're going to run late today. Welcome to members of the two governing bodies sitting around the table, and to other NHS officers and clinicians who are joining us to help us with this decision today. And welcome to Hebburn and this Hebburn Hub building, newly built relatively recently by our partners at South Tyneside Council. Now, as we have throughout this consultation, we've prioritised coming to local communities and the communities that are most affected by the changes that we're proposing. We started the public consultation in Jarrow, and it's only right that we make our decision here today in Hebburn. Thank you to anybody who's watching this meeting live on the internet. We do feel this is an important development for transparency and to allow everybody interested in these important decisions to hear the information at the same time as those who've chosen to come sit in the room today. As NHS bodies, we hold all our formal governing body meetings in public. This allows the opportunity for members of the public to observe our discussions, considerations and our decisions about how NHS services are planned and delivered to meet the needs of our local population. I'd like to remind those present in the public gallery today that this is not a public meeting for further debate with the public on the consultation issues, but the two statutory NHS organisations meeting their duty of transparency and conducting our business meetings today in public. I'd like to point out also this is not a joint meeting of the governing bodies, but a meeting being held in common. This means that the governing bodies of both CCGs are meeting at the same time, but will make individual decisions for the respective CCGs. I will chair the items on the agenda for South Tyneside CCG. My colleague Dr Ian Patterson will chair this for Sunderland CCG. I'd like people to politely note that people are respectful in the public gallery, and I want to be very clear that if we do have disruption from the public gallery, I will suspend the meeting and ask the governing body members to reconvene in another room where we can continue without the members of the public present. I do hope that this doesn't happen, but if it does, we will continue to broadcast via the internet. Because we're broadcasting live, I'd like people to try to bear in mind that people are observing remotely. We will all try our very best to speak clearly, and I'll need to help from the videographers with the cameras, chair the meeting and help them to do the best job they can of the filming process. All the people sat around this table are governing body voting members, with the exception of two directors in attendance and people taking the notes of the minutes. I'll ask everybody to clearly introduce themselves with their job title and the role on the governing body, and to specify if they're voting members. I'm Dr Matthew Wormsley. I'm the chair of South Tyneside CCG and GP in South Tyneside.
I'm Dr David Hamilton. I'm the Chief Executive of South Tyneside Clinical Commissioning Group.
I'm Steve Clark. I'm a lay member and I'm Deputy Chair of South Tyneside CCG.
I'm Dr Viswanathan, GP Board Member for South Tyneside CCG.
I'm Andy Sutton, I'm the Governor for South Tyneside CCG.
Hi, I'm Kate Hudson. I'm the Chief Finance Officer for South Tyneside CCG.
Hello, I'm Dr Tarquin Cross. I'm a consultant physician and I'm the secondary care clinician on South Tyneside CCG's governing body.
Good afternoon, my name is Jeanette Scott. I'm Director of Nursing Quality and Safety at South Tyneside CCG, with board responsibility for the quality and safety of commission services.
Hello, I'm Paul Morgan. I'm a lay member for governance on South Tyneside CCG.
Good afternoon, Jeff Gosling, lay member for South Tyneside CCG for patient and public involvement.
And Matt Brown, Director of Operations for South Tyneside CCG, a non-voting member.
I'm Dr Ian Patterson. I'm the GP Chair of Sunderland CCG.
Good afternoon, I'm David Gallagher. I'm the Chief Officer at Sunderland CCG.
I'm Fadi Khalil, GP and Clinical Vice Chair.
Hello, I'm Chris Macklin. I'm the lay member for Audit and Risk at Sunderland CCG.
Hello, my name is Derek Cruikshank. I'm a recently retired consultant gynae-oncologist from South Tees and the Secondary Care Doctor in Sunderland CCG governing body.
Good afternoon, I'm Anne Fox. I'm the Director of Nursing Quality and Safety for Sunderland CCG and the Executive Nurse for the governing body.
Good afternoon, my name is Dr Gelia. I'm Executive GP at Sunderland CCG.
afternoon, I'm Jan Thwaites. I'm the Corporate Affairs Support Officer for Sunderland CCG.
Good afternoon, I'm Jacqueline Gillespie. I'm an Exec GP for Sunderland CCG.
Good afternoon, I'm David Chandler. I'm the Chief Finance Officer at Sunderland CCG.
Afternoon, I'm Dr Tracy Lucas. I'm a GP on Sunderland CCG and a GP working in Sunderland.
Hello, my name's Aileen Sullivan. I'm the lay member for Patient Public Involvement at Sunderland CCG.
Hello, good afternoon to all. I'm Dr Raj Bedapudi, GP at Sunderland CCG and Exec GP for Sunderland CCG.
Good afternoon, my name's Scott Watson. I'm Director of Contract and Informatics for Sunderland CCG and Director Lead for the Path to Excellence for Sunderland CCG.
Thank you, colleagues. I believe we don't have any apologies for absence that we've been notified about today, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is declarations of interest from members of the governing body on any of the items today.
Thank you, Chair. Just to declare, my sister is a ITU nurse at South Tyneside District Hospital.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't think that has a direct bearing today, so we're happy for you to remain part of the decision-making body today, David. Governing bodies, members, I'd like to start the formal business meeting agenda with a reminder about the importance of the decisions today that we'll make, and that this is the culmination of 20 months of work and thousands of man-hours of work. We all recognise the fundamental importance and value of having local hospitals providing a range of services, and we wish to see both hospitals develop and thrive over the coming years. It's been stated many times publicly by the Hospital Chief Executive, by myself and by other NHS leaders in South Tyneside that there is a strong and vibrant future for South Tyneside Hospital and that we are all committed to that. However, it's clear that the consequences of continued service duplication across South Tyneside District Hospital and Sunderland Royal Hospital, not least in terms of workforce availability, is presenting challenges to the delivery of safe and high-quality services. When we talk about safe and high-quality services, that means care that treats your medical condition by the correct professional with access to the best diagnostics and treatment to give people the very best possible chance of recovery, and if they're not able to recover, does not make them worse or do them any harm. Stroke, obstetrics and gynecology and paediatrics emergency services are amongst those that South Tyneside and Sunderland's hospital-based services that are facing the most severe workforce sustainability challenges. Driven predominantly by a limited medical workforce, resulting in service continuity, quality and financial pressures. So there is no element of doubt, and to be categorically clear, retaining the status quo and not making any changes is simply not an option for these services. And as a group of healthcare leaders who are also senior doctors and nurses in charge of local healthcare services, we must act in the best interest of patients, as our first duty of care is to do our patients no harm. It is extremely likely that a failure to act now would lead to closures of services across South Tyneside and Sunderland in a crisis situation under crisis circumstances, putting patient safety at risk. And again, to be clear, what we mean by patient safety risk is increasing the risk of death, serious harm, or a lifelong condition or disability for our patients. We recognise that local people are passionate about retaining very localised services, but we must be clear we're not interested in doing the easy thing. We're not taking part in a political popularity contest. We do our jobs because we believe that local people deserve the best NHS they can possibly get, whichever building it's based in today, and that's the decision that you governing body members will be having to take shortly today. That's what that decision is all about. First item on the agenda for our meeting today is the item for assurance of the Path to Excellent Phase 1 consultation process. So this is a recommendation that we are asked to accept. The CCGs are assured of the consultation process being robust, meeting legal and policy obligations and providing information needed in order to make a decision on the reconfiguration of services. I think David Gallagher is going to take us through the report that's been written to assure us of that.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We're starting with consultation because consultation is really important. It's really important for two reasons. One, the lesser reason, there's a statutory requirement for CCGs to undertake consultation when they're looking at service review. But most importantly, it's something we want to do. We wanted to have a process that involved and listened to local people and stakeholders and got their views. So the paper you've got in front of me that I'll ask Scott Watson to talk to in a moment actually goes through that. because we have that statutory responsibility to fulfil in terms of involving, engaging, and where necessary, as the case here, actually consulting with the public. So Scott's going to take us through that, so before we get into making any decisions, we can actually be assured ourselves that the process has fulfilled those statutory responsibilities and indeed has been robust as it needs to be. So I'll ask Scott Watson now to go into some more detail around that, please.
Can everybody hear okay? Yep. Is that a little bit better? Okay. The purpose of this report, as has already been mentioned, is to provide assurance around the service reform processes followed, in particular that commissioners have met their statutory duties for consultation and major service change. Firstly, I'd like to start off by saying that there's no how-to guide with regards to how to do consultation. We draw upon NHS statutory duties, English law and NHS policy to help form and shape this process. Some examples of this include the Equality Act 2010, which has helped inform our strategy regarding accessing patient groups with protected characteristics. The NHS Constitution, in particular, the right of the public to be involved in the planning of healthcare services, the condition of proposals and in the decisions to be made in the operation of those services, and also the Gunning Principles, which are now applicable to all public consultations that take place in the UK. For those of you not familiar with the Gunning Principles, they are in summary that there should be no predetermination of options. They should be presented at the formative stage and should be subject to change from the consultation process. Consultees should have been given enough information to make an informed choice and to be able to give intelligent consideration to the options proposed. There should also be adequate time for consideration and response, and decision makers must conscientiously take into account responses from the consultation to inform their decision making. A more extensive list of the legislative and policy drivers are found in the report at Appendix 1. As Commissioners, and in recognition of our need to meet our obligations under the aforementioned requirements, the CCG's commissioned North of England Commission in support to undertake the role of engagement and consultation for the programme. For the remainder of this report, I'll refer to North of England Commission in support as NEX. NEX has recognised expertise and significant experience in providing public engagement and consultation support in the areas of major service change. Via NEX, Commissioners also enlisted independent external expertise from the Consultation Institute. This was done to oversee and evaluate the engagement and consultation process, to provide third-party assurance and credibility to stakeholders regarding good practice. As you would expect, there's also been some significant assurance tests that are required to be passed by NHS England and NHS Improvement. The Assurance Framework for Service Change provides a robust planning framework against which the proposals and consultation process can be assessed. And I'm pleased to say that Phase 1 of the Path to Excellence programme has passed the joint NHS England and NHS Improvement assurance process. I'm moving into Section 3 around engagement and consultation governance. The overall process for running the consultation was overseen by a governance group, the terms of reference of which can be found as Appendix 2. But in summary, the remit of this group was to ensure the compliance with legal duties, local and national policy guidance and mandated requirements, the identification and mitigation of risks related to the consultation and the programme, the overview of communications and engagement strategies development and implementation, to ensure quality and travel impact analysis and assurance was undertaken robustly, and to sign off key documents, including the pre-consultation business case for change and other consultation publications. In order to deliver the engagement and consultation work, we also established a communication and engagement group. This group has consisted of members of Health Watch, patient involvement staff, programme staff and members of the CCG and NEX. Key areas of work covered by this group include the development of the surveys and discussion guides, input into communication plans for engagement, review of key documents including the main consultation document, and suggestions for engagement and consultation methods, including recommendations for training and support. I'd just like to say at this point the work of this group has been extremely positive and its input invaluable in ensuring that the consultation has been wide-ranging, of high quality, open into taking different views and experiences into account. The group will continue to oversee the updated communications and engagement strategy for Phase 2 of the Path to Excellence programme, as well as making key recommendations for how learning from Phase 1 can be incorporated to ensure that we continuously improve. I'd like to now talk a little bit about the engagement and consultation methodology that we've used. The process of engagement and consultation was basically delivered in two phases. There was the pre-engagement listening phase and the formal consultation phase. The pre-engagement listening phase was when we published our issues document and started to talk to partners, stakeholders and staff about the problems facing these three vulnerable services. In this phase, we attended ward and locality meetings, did media and publicity briefings and carried out targeted work with people who had lived experiences of services. And by lived experiences, we're basically talking about patients who had used those services in the previous 24 months. In total, we attended 18 different public events and presented to almost 450 people across South Tyneside and Sunderland. Section 4.2 of the report gives further insight into how the pre-engagement work was delivered, with the analytical detail underpinning the pre-engagement phase found as Appendix 4 of this report. Once we'd gathered all of that information, we then used all of this data to compile a feedback report that was presented back to the clinical design teams to help inform their design of the options. This report was published online and also presented to the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee as part of our programme of ongoing engagement with them. The remainder of Section 4.3 in the report provides a high-level summary of the findings. In Section 5, we focus on how the pre-engagement listening phase influenced the development of the options. For stroke, getting the right care in the right place was the most influential factor. Most inpatients surveyed say it was very important to them to receive their care in a specialist unit. Only 2/3 of South Tyneside residents responded to say that they were admitted to a specialist stroke unit. This is against a backdrop of a national target that determines that 90% of stroke patients should be spending 90% of their time on a dedicated stroke ward. So you can see there was some areas for concern. With regard to maternity and women's healthcare services, there are a number of influencing factors. The importance of choice was the key influencing factor, including having choice of consultant and midwifery care in the same location. The proximity of services when giving birth was also identified as being very important. Section 5.2 in the report details other key considerations in relation to the maternity and women's healthcare work. Finally, in regard to children and young people's healthcare, the key influencing factor was around seeing the correct specialist who could deal with a child's illness or injury, and that was deemed to be more important than having a paediatric emergency department close to home. It was recognised that over half of those attending the current paediatric emergency department had tried to gain an appointment either with their GP or had called 111 prior to the attendance. This feedback, combined with further analysis of the case mix and acuity of patients presented, resulted in the options being changed and incorporating a nurse-led model within the proposals. I think it's probably prudent to point out now at this point there was a real cross-cutting measure in terms of across the pre-engagement work in relation to transport, travel and transport, and we knew straight away from the pre-engagement phase that this would be a significant issue going into the consultation period. So consequently, we dedicated we provided some dedicated events for this topic, which I'll pick up later in this report. Moving on to Section 6 in terms of the consultation phase. Via our comms and engagement group, we developed a strategy for the consultation phase. The objectives of this strategy were fivefold and are detailed within the paper. Communications activity in relation to the consultation used a broad range of methodologies, including social media, digital marketing, dedicated bulletins to staff, communication and other media releases, the full details of which can be found in Appendix 5. At this point, it's probably worth noting that in terms of the original consultation, we were caught a little bit on the hop in terms of the snap general election that was called last year. So this pushed our planned timescales for the consultation out into the summer months. Obviously, we were being very mindful of PERDA. We discussed this within the governance group, and it was agreed that we would extend the consultation period to 14.5 weeks, ensuring that events were programmed in after the summer break. Again, in making this decision, we were very mindful of our obligations under the Gunning principles and the requirement to ensure that everyone had time to consider the options and respond. Learning from other consultations around the country, we recognised the need to be clear in the communications approach to what were complex consultation options. To this end, we ensured that each service area had dedicated consultation events and that supporting documentation and literature was as easily accessible and as understandable as possible, such that the consultees could give intelligent consideration of the options. To satisfy this, there was a comprehensive publication scheme published on the Path to Excellence website, which included a broad range of documentation. This ranged from very technical business documents to easy-to-read versions of the consultation. A range of summaries was also produced and published to accompany the very technical and detailed impact assessments that had been undertaken. With regard to the events that we held, initially we had planned to undertake 11 public events as part of the consultation process. These were categorised as launch events, public discussion events, and deliberative events, basically events that were dedicated to the subject matter, the three services. At the outset of the consultation, we recognised that this was going to have to be a dynamic process and that we may have to respond to change as the initial events unfolded, and this proved to be the case. There were several changes made to the consultation process, with the length of meetings increased to allow extra time for conversation, questions and answers. We also allowed for members of the public to sit separately from NHS staff during some events, but we also had to try and retain the flexibility to accommodate mixed tables if and when necessary. We actually also had to increase the number of events we held, increasing the numbers up to 19, adding an additional 8 events, of which in total 440 people attended. As I've previously mentioned, at an early stage we identified travel and transport as a key issue, and as a result dedicated travel and transport events were planned. One of which was for the public that allowed the feedback to be considered, and the second event was for other stakeholders, which by other stakeholders we mean transport operators, Nexus, local authorities, so on and so forth. These dedicated sessions also meant that the travel and transport issues, whilst recognised as a major concern, didn't dominate the debate in the other consultation meetings, and allowed us to focus on the clinical specialties and have due consideration for the information that people were trying to convey in those meetings. Item 6.7 in the report focuses on surveys, focus groups and the submissions that we sought to inform the consultation process. As part of this work, we undertook a range of different survey methods, one of which was an available online and paper survey, which included a free post-return. This was heavily promoted across all Path to Excellence literature and correspondence, and we received almost 500 completed surveys by the close of the consultation. We also undertook on-street surveys, which were shorter but allowed us to get more information from locally representative sample of people. We received over 800 responses using this methodology. Also, to ensure we're obtaining the maximum breadth and depth of response to the consultation, we commissioned a range of focus groups which were run on our behalf by local voluntary organisations. This was done in recognition of their ability to reach further into communities with protected characteristics. 32 groups in all took place with over 320 participants. As part of the process, we also actively sought out the opinions of groups, teams and other individuals. And to this end, we received responses from key stakeholders such as Healthwatch, scrutiny committees, trade unions, affected staff groups and other elected representatives of both local communities, such as MPs and local councillors. We've also received a response from the Sale South Tyneside Hospital campaign, along with a petition of circa 30,000 signatures. Again, in adhering to best practice, we also revisited the original pre-engagement cohort with a revised survey aligned to the consultation options. In total, we received 141 responses for maternity and women's health, 81 stroke returns and 102 for children and young people services, also known as paediatrics. Item 6.9 gives you an overview of the consultation benchmarking, and I think it's probably worth spending a little bit of time in terms of looking at this. Generally, the Consultation Institute identifies a good consultation as a consultation that achieves about a 1% response rate of the targeted population. The average national UK consultation tends to achieve about a 0.7% response rate. The Path to Excellence consultation achieved a response rate of 0.56% of the South Tyneside and Sunderland population. However, to put this into context, 2 recent NHS consultations, one in Calderdale and Greater Huddersfield and one taken as part of the Manchester Devolution Programme, achieved varying response rates of between 0.1% and 0.9% respectively. Although at this point it should be pointed out that the latter achieved a considerably greater budget, had a considerably greater budget than that was available to South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs. Whilst we recognise that the response rate for our consultation has fallen a little bit short of the average, we are incredibly pleased with the depth and breadth of the qualitative methods used during the process. This has enabled us to gain a good spread of views and opinion from across our society. And at this point, I'd like to say that at the midpoint review from the Consultation Institute, we were deemed as achieving best practice. So whilst the volumes may not have been there in terms of response rate, the depth and breadth of the consultation was identified as being very good. Section 7 of the report talks a little bit about targeted stakeholder engagement, and I'd like to spend just a little time talking in regard to the engagement we undertook with the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As Commissioners, we're extremely mindful of our statutory duties to engage with Health Overview and Scrutiny Committees and elected members. We respect this as how NHS organisations locally are held to democratic accountability. Given the complexity of the consultation and the cross-boundary nature of the Path to Excellence programme, we made a request to the respective local Health Overview and Scrutiny Committees to create a joint committee for the consideration of the Phase 1 Path to Excellence process, to which they agreed. We believe the interaction with the Joint Committee has been exemplary, with no fewer than 11 meetings held with either the full formal committee or committee members and other gathered elected representatives, in total over 30 hours. Further to which, time has also been spent by our accountable officers regularly briefing the joint chairs of the committee. Indeed, I would draw members' attention to the committee's interim response of the consultation in October 2017, which described the consultation as robust and welcomed the involvement of the Independent Consultation Institute in helping ensure that the Path to Excellence follows the very best in consultation practice. It also praised the cooperation and commitment of key staff from the NHS, who had provided the committee with the information and evidence requested on numerous occasions, and remarked that this had certainly helped the committee in its endeavours. That's the good news. That said, it should, however, be noted by members of the committee and its final response, which was received in January 2018, that was quite contradictory to the original response received in October 2017. The final response from the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee cited serious concerns with the consultation process and identified many issues with regards to the information presented, including information being cited as being overly complex, confusing and lacking clarity. Consequently, the committee has retained its right through its constituent authorities to refer the decisions made today to the Secretary of State for Health. You will note further in section 7.1 of the report additional detail with regards to the work undertaken with the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. With regards to other key stakeholders engaged, both the South Tyneside and Sunderland Health Watch groups have been heavily engaged in the process, participating in the Communications and Engagement Group. They have provided robust, positive challenge, along with suggestions and ideas to contribute to the engagement and consultation process. They have also been regular attendees at many of our consultation events and have attended scrutiny sessions. Section 7.2 in the report provides further detail on the work undertaken with both Health Watch organisations. With regards to staff engagement, from the outset of the programme, this has involved clinical leaders in both hospitals working together in small design teams to discuss how they think services should be delivered in the future. During the formal consultation period, both South Tyneside and City Hospital Sunderland Foundation Trusts have openly encouraged an active participation of staff and have asked them to make efforts to input their views as part of the formal consultation process. I think it's fair to say that this is not to say improvements cannot be made to this process, and going forward into the next phase of engagement, this will be broadened with activity already underway in terms of staff surveys and co-production events planned for March. I'd also like to mention the Save South Tyneside Hospital campaign. We're obviously very aware of the campaign and the work of the group, and during the consultation process, the Chief Executive of the South Tyneside and Sunderland Hospital Group met with leaders from the campaign group. We've also welcomed their regular and active participation at many of our consultation events. The remainder of Section 7 provides further insight into the other engagement work undertaken, including additional work with GPs, MPs, etc. Section 8 of the report underscores the Commissioner's compliance with the Equality Act and the Public Sector Equality Duty. As previously mentioned, the Path to Excellence plans are subject to a rigorous NHS assurance process which aims to eliminate discrimination, promote equality, and ensure that wherever possible, services are provided in ways which might reduce health inequalities. As part of ensuring that we were diligent in our responsibilities with regard to the Equality Act and the Public Sector Equality Duty, a number of integrated impact assessments were undertaken. These assessments identified groups which could be vulnerable to the proposals or aspects of the services which could reduce or deepen health inequalities. Our consultation strategy ensured that we took the opportunity to engage in a meaningful dialogue with these groups of people and to ensure that there was an opportunity to fully participate in the consultation. The programme invited local third sector voluntary and community groups and organisations to hold events in South Tyneside and Sunderland to support the consultation process. And in support of this work, we offered a wide range of support, which is further detailed in the report. In summary, over 80 organisations in South Tyneside and Sunderland were identified and asked if they were interested in running focus groups and events. Overall, there's been a generally good response to this work, and to date we've worked with over 20 local organisations, delivered a combined total of 32 focus groups, events or one-to-one work, and have worked with over 324 people. Further detail regarding our pre-engagement and consultation work with protected characteristic groups can be found in Appendix 7 of the report. Section 9 details the consultation feedback and sharing and analysis. In order to maintain independence and impartiality in the consultation process, we commissioned a third-party company called Social Marketing Partners. This was to support the development and design of the consultation surveys and also to review and produce the consultation feedback report, which we published in early December 2017. The publication of this report marked the start of a period of consideration by South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs, which lasted until the 8th of January 2018. This consideration period presented the public and stakeholders with a further opportunity to comment on the findings of the consultation and the proposed next steps. It also included staff and public feedback sessions, clinical workshops with members of the Clinical Services Review Group, and workshops with the 2 CCG governing bodies. The final report, for those of you who may wish to review it again, has been published on the Path to Excellence website. Section 11 of the report, and I've skipped Section 10 as we're all here today, so I don't think we need to refer to that. Section 11 of the report refers to the meeting that we held in December of the 2 governing bodies, where we gave feedback with regards to the consultation findings. The purpose of the session was to share the draft feedback from the consultation report and for members of the clinical design teams to provide their response and make recommendations for adjustments to the originally proposed clinical models as a result of the public feedback. As a consequence of that meeting, and before agreement could be reached to sign off the consultation process, a number of additional assurances were sought, which are detailed in Section 11 of the report. We believe that these outstanding assurances have consequently been provided through the work undertaken at the subsequent January governing body workshop and via reports circulated to members upon request. As we have received no further queries in relation to these matters, we have assumed that the assurances given are now sufficient. Finally, I'd like to just end on Section 12 with regard to the Consultation Institute's independent quality assurance process. As previously mentioned, in order to ensure a good consultation process, Commissioners asked the Independent Consultation Institute to conduct a quality assurance review of our process. Within Section 12, we have provided the latest position regarding the assessment, which cannot be finally signed off until after today's meeting. I would direct members' attention to the table on page 34 of the report, which provides the assessment received at each stage thus far. I'd also like to draw members' attention to the pre-decision-making position of February 2018, where the Consultation Institute verbally confirmed a final best practice certification would be pending, subject to how the final decision-making is conducted. A copy of the Consultation Institute's mid-term quality assurance feedback is included as appendices 8A, 8B and 8C to this report. I'd finally just like to end by re-emphasising the recommendation of the report, which is for the governing bodies of South Tyneside and Sunderland CCG to formally endorse the communications and engagement activity for the consultation process for Phase 1 of the Path to Excellence programme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott, for extremely in-depth coverage of the consultation activity. I know it has been a significant piece of work, and I'd like to thank you and the team that's done it once again for that. Colleagues around the table, I don't know if anybody has any further questions or comments to raise with Scott before we move to the assurance phase. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask Scott, the working group on travel and transport, perhaps you could give us, or somebody around the table could give us an update on the work that's actually taken place and any further mitigations of the issues that have been identified in the consultation that might have been revealed or progressed?
I can certainly give it a go, and I would probably then look at my colleague Matt to jump in and provide any additional information.
I don't know whether you'd feel it appropriate to do that now under the assurance part, or whether you want to cover that later on in the looking at the options, Matt.
I'd certainly intend to cover some of that in the decision-making paper later.
Okay, fine.
So maybe we cover that later, and then if there's anything that you need further clarification on, we'll cover it then. Okay. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Scott, I was interested, you referred to the Joint Scrutiny Committee and there being a difference in response from October 2017 to January 2018. Could you explain what had happened? Had anything happened in the consultation between those dates that would explain the change in reaction?
I think therein lies the quandary. I don't think anybody from the programme can actually identify any significant changes in our engagement with the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee that would lead to such a drastic change in opinion between the two reports.
Thank you.
Scott, can I ask you about the staff, please? I know that we consulted the staff during this process, but can I just ask, after the initial phases, did staff come back to us with any further comments or questions they wanted to raise about this?
So in terms of the staff engagement, there were over 100 staff attended the sessions from the start of the consultation process. That doesn't include, in those numbers, that doesn't include any additional feedback in terms of surveys or reports and so on and so forth. There were a number of proposals that were identified. One of them was around an additional special care baby unit proposal, which I'm sure Matt might allude to in the decision-making report. And we also identified another paediatric option that was also assessed as part of that process. I'm not aware of any additional proposals that came back from any of the staff as a consequence of the consultation other than those two.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, there'll be no further questions or comments from colleagues. We'll conduct the decision-making on individual CCG basis, so I'd like to ask members of South Tyneside CCG governing body if they feel happy to do as they're asked, which is to formally endorse the communications and engagement activity undertaken for the consultation process for this phase 1 of the Path to Excellence programme. If you could raise your hands if you're happy with that, South Tyneside governing body members. Thank you. That's a unanimous decision there. I'll pass to my colleague, Dr. Patterson.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Okay, so similarly, as what we've done earlier, so let's just ask the governing body for Sunderland, if you're ready. So the governing bodies of South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs are asked to formally endorse the communication engagement activity undertaken for the consultation process for phase 1 of the Path to Excellence programme. Everybody happy to endorse that? Just a little further down the line. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. In that case, we need to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the substantive decision-making item today on the Path to Excellence proposals. And I think David Hamilton, colleague Chief Officer in South Tyneside, is going to introduce this item.
Thanks, Chair. I think we've heard a lot about the process that we've gone through, and I'm very pleased that both governing bodies are happy with the approach that was taken. I guess we now need to move to the meat of the business of the day, which is to make a decision based on everything that we've heard. I just wanted to say a few words before I pass over to Matt to take us through the decision-making paper. The first thing is that we've consistently heard from people, members of the public and others, that no change to these services would be their preferred option. And sadly I think we've reiterated quite consistently that that is not possible, and we've also been at pains to point out the reasons for that. But I thought that from the two governing bodies' perspective it might be helpful for us to hear directly from Ken Bremner, who's the Chief Executive of both South Tyneside and City Hospital Sunderland, to give his perspective on why no change is indeed not an option from the hospital's perspective either. So I'd like to invite, with members' permission, Ken to come and say a few words about that, if that's okay.
I'll just check you can hear me. Yep. So thank you very much for the opportunity of addressing both governing bodies this afternoon, because this is an important day. Because it's the culmination of quite a lot of work done by a lot of partners, other organisations, and I want to take the opportunity firstly of thanking both CCGs, other stakeholders and other partners for the efforts they put in getting us to this particular point. But I also want to take the opportunity while I'm here as well to say a thank you to the staff of both hospitals in Sunderland and South Tyneside. I mean, not only over the past 2 years or so have they continued to do the day job, and particularly at the moment when we're under fairly unrelenting pressures, but they've done so with the added uncertainty of all the work and issues that we've been going through. So it is an opportunity to say thank you to them as well. Some of the issues you're addressing today are not new. They are not new, but underlying and running through all the clinical service reviews, from the hospital's perspective, I think there are two particularly key issues, and they revolve around clinical safety and quality and the sustainability of our workforce. And it's no surprise that the three services you're considering today are being considered because they have demonstrated most aptly in the last 6 months or so some of the vulnerabilities that we have in some of those particular services. So I was of the opinion then, when we started all this work nearly 2 years ago, and I am of the same opinion today, that no change here cannot be an option. We need a plan that addresses those issues of clinical safety and quality and the vulnerabilities in our workforce, and your decision today is going to be a key driver in making that plan a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. And I guess what you've done is underlined for us some of the key reasons behind us wanting to make these suggested changes. I guess personally, I feel the weight of responsibility of that change because it is significant, and we've heard throughout the process how important people of South Tyneside and Sunderland feel about these three particular services. However, I think we should carry that responsibility in the knowledge that we've spent a considerable amount of time and effort trying to gather as much information as possible. I don't need to tell our governing body members again the amount of public patient experience we've garnered, but also the clinical expertise we've drawn from across our two patches and right across the region and indeed nationally. So I think it's with that in mind, the fact that this day is a culmination of all of those conversations, that I think we should enter into that decision making with some degree of confidence that we're actually going to make the right decision for the people of both South Tyneside and Sunderland. And at that point I'm just going to hand over to Matt to take us through the paper.
Can you hear me okay in the back there? Good. I'm going to start with a small amount of context, and then I'm going to take each service in the order that they are set out in the decision-making paper. So I'll be starting with obstetrics and gynecology, paediatrics, and then stroke medicine. And for clarity for each service, I'm going to start by setting out the recommendation that we're making to the governing bodies today. I'm going to outline some of the key points within the rationale, and then I'll close each section by summarising the recommendations again. So we've heard from David, Ken and others that we are clear that no change is not an option, and as a consequence we set out to consider solutions to try and address the issues that are set out already. Clinically led design teams, informed by the pre-engagement that Scott has touched upon, set out a long list of options for consideration, and you can see those on page 21 of the decision-making paper. Those were taken through the hurdle criteria that are set out on pages 19 and 20, which were about the ability to deliver high-quality safe care, sustainability of the clinical workforce, affordability and deliverability. And after we've taken those options through the hurdle criteria, we resulted in a short list of options for consideration and for public consultation, which are set out in the paper in front of you. Scott has talked a lot about the pre-engagement and public consultation process, so I won't duplicate that, but I am going to pick up specific points of feedback from the consultation as I run through each service area. And I think it's important to note, pick up on Aileen's point, that we did give the opportunity for further options to be put forward during the consultation process. I'll touch on that as we go. Through the process and acting on feedback that we received from the public consultation, the two CCGs determined 6 decision-making criteria with the intention of helping guide the qualitative assessment that we're going to make today. Those 6 criteria were about safety and quality, clinical sustainability, accessibility and choice, deliverability, health inequalities, and value for money. We sought significant independent expertise and assurance from clinical networks and stakeholders, external regulatory processes, and the consultation experts. As Scott's mentioned, we also commissioned specific travel and transport and integrated equality, health and health inequalities impact assessments. Both of those were available throughout the public consultation, and they were subject of much debate. As a consequence, they were tested, reviewed and strengthened in light of the feedback we received on them. In terms of the integrated equality, health and health inequalities impact assessments, which I'll refer to as the IIA from this point for ease, we particularly considered the impact on vulnerable groups. The travel and transport impact assessment has been a key part of the work we've done to date, and a substantial amount of work is now underway through the travel and transport stakeholder group that we established through the consultation process. That group features the local NHS, local authorities, Nexus, bus companies, patient user groups and elected members, and some of the work is set out in appendix to this document and summarised on page 25. In particular, I think it's important that the governing bodies reflect back to the public that we take the personal impact of additional travel on families, patients and carers extremely seriously. We strive to secure the best health and healthcare for our population. In doing so, we fully recognise the significance of this decision that we're taking today for every single one of the patients we serve, and we seek to balance all of the various factors that we take into consideration to reach the best possible decision we can. So having touched upon that area of context, I'd like to move us on to obstetrics and gynecology. So the recommendation is that the governing body members of South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs approve option 1 for implementation. Option 1 is the development of a freestanding midwife-led unit at South Tyneside District Hospital and medically-led obstetric unit at Sunderland Royal Hospital. That is as compared with option 2, which consolidates all hospital-based birthing options at Sunderland Royal Hospital. I think we should note that we considered, given the service pressures, significant different options in the long listing, and you'll note on page 21, they go so far as removing those services entirely from South Tyneside and Sunderland, although that option did not pass the hurdle criteria. The recommendation we make is on the basis of all the evidence considered, but we're just going to pull out some of the key points here. A strong preference for choice and to retain births at South Tyneside District Hospital was expressed by patients and the public through both the pre-consultation and the consultation process. Option 1 was favoured by pregnant women and mothers of children aged under 2 in particular. Both options were supported by the Northern England Maternity Clinical Network, but it was recognised that option 1 offered a greater choice of birth options to expectant mothers. There's a high level of confidence that safety and quality will be improved with an increase of consultant cover on obstetric-led units to 84 hours a week. And the strategic alignment with the Better Births policy is much greater with option 1 in terms of the choices that expectant mothers would have with the introduction of that freestanding midwife-led unit, and that's very much in line with NICE guidelines. I think option 1 presents a great opportunity to develop a freestanding midwife-led unit that could become a holistic, community-facing birthing centre for both the population of South Tyneside and Sunderland, and has the potential to be right at the heart of local community. Whilst the IIA gives positive scores for both options, the scoring is somewhat higher for option 1. And the IIA determines that both options will give children a better start in life and could therefore deliver enduring and significant benefits to child health, population health, and improve inequalities across both populations. The positive impact is judged to be across both populations equally. The IIA does, however, note a number of considerations for us in implementation, not least around information for patients and the public, establishing a cross-area women's services user group, and specifically thinking about plans for breastfeeding initiation, which is a key issue for both populations. In terms of the public engagement and consultation, notwithstanding the previous points that David's made about the views on the status quo, we noted that option 1 broadly had greater support than option 2. But particular consideration we've given to the feedback about consultant presence and clinical safety. We recognise childbirth is not a simple process. However, the evidence is categorically clear that FMLUs, freestanding midwife-led units, are at least as effective and safe as obstetric-led units. And we heard that throughout the process from the clinical experts who came to present to the governing bodies. A key, though, is that we start with really rigorous risk assessment for expectant mothers. And also we noted that the availability of senior doctors is a key driver behind the need for change. We noted concerns from the public about the need for transfer, what happens when a low-risk birth becomes a high-risk birth, and the ability of NIAS to respond in those circumstances. We recognise that as a key concern. Again, I think it's important to note the clinical evidence is clear that freestanding midwife-led units are at least as safe as obstetric units and may well be associated with better outcomes. We have now had clear assurance about the stratified risk transfer of patients from NIAS and the local clinical teams. NIAS have confirmed that the freestanding midwife-led unit would not be considered as a place of safety, and hence it will be prioritised accordingly, and that is a key concern for the clinical teams. We noted that the average time from transfer to birth for those patients who do need transfer is about 4.5 hours. So although there are concerns particularly about the emergency transfers for those women who move from low to high risk during pregnancy, actually the average is 4.5 hours, and the modelling on pages 43 and 44 of the document suggests that maybe 4 to 6 emergency transfers per annum would be what we would expect. Another key concern that we heard from the public engagement consultation is about the sustainability of freestanding midwife-led units. But it is clear that there are a large number of units around the country that are sustainable. There's a very specific map set out in the document which points out the variety of freestanding midwife-led units around the country. I think critically, it's more than just a place to give birth. It's about how we connect antenatal care, postnatal care, smoking cessation, breastfeeding support and so on. The impact is broader than simply the number of births potentially for our population. Both populations have extremely high levels of smoking in pregnancy and low levels of breastfeeding initiation, and potentially this is a way to address that for some families. Furthermore, we think it's really important that a group of patients, staff, elected members and other partners are established to develop a co-produced model through the implementation, helping us seek and ensure sustainability of this moving forward, and that group could also help us monitor and assess the success and the viability of the freestanding midwife-led unit post-implementation. As Scott touched on earlier, travel and local services was really important to patients and the public. So although there's a travel impact for South Tyneside patients under both options, that is lessened to some degree under option 1. We felt that increased consultant presence through co-location of obstetrics and inpatient gynaecology offers a substantial opportunity to improve quality, but also that we are undertaking a significant amount of work to mitigate the travel and transport impacts. We've touched on the travel and transport stakeholder group, and to date that's been a really positive meeting with all partners coming to the table, seeking solutions to the problems that were set out in the consultation, not least around personalised journey planning, helping people have the information that's out there but perhaps in an inaccessible format, looking at things such as discounted staff travel tickets, travel planning coordination, mapping, leaflets and so on. The group identified key issues in terms of information availability. So just to recap on the recommendation, we're recommending that governing body members of South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs approve option 1 for implementation. Option 1 is the development of a freestanding midwife-led unit at South Tyneside District Hospital and medically led obstetric unit at Sunderland Royal Hospital. And governing body members of both CCGs are asked to note that we would set out implementation aiming to be complete by April 2019.
Thank you very much, Matt. Can I ask colleagues around the table if they have any questions or comments for Matt before we proceed to decision making on the obstetric proposals?
Thank you very much for that, Matt. I just want to ask you about sustainability of the unit, and I hear what you're saying about making sure that we ensure this is a community hub. So it's more than just about a place to deliver, but we'll give additional support. However, how are we going to ensure that that unit is used? How are we going to communicate this to people? How are we going to let people know that this facility is available to them? Because numbers using this unit is going to be very important to its long-term sustainability.
I think that's absolutely true. But I do go back to the point that the numbers are a part of the puzzle. Sustainability for us is about how we improve health outcomes as well as the numbers coming through. But we have given some calculations on page 39 about broadly what we would expect in terms of the likely numbers coming through the unit. I mean, we've set as an appendix to this document a suggested marketing engagement strategy, helping get that message out to mothers. But really, a key part for me is about working with our local clinical teams, our GPs, community midwives and other NHS staff, helping to get the message out about that unit. And I go back to the point I made about setting up a group with key local stakeholders, partners, elected members, patients and staff, helping us build a really positive sense that this is a great opportunity, potentially, for the people of the South Tyneside and Sunderland, if we choose to pursue this option.
Thank you. My concern is also around the long-term sustainability. It's not the safety, I think it's well, sorry. I think the case is well made in the document, and the team have put a lot of effort into predicting sustainability. The hub format makes absolute sense, and that's the right thing to do. I think we need to be cautious that, unfortunately, there does need to be monitoring of the activity in terms of births, because although it's a conservative estimate, the number of 320, historically an experience is such that the actual number of women eligible who choose that option tends to be less than what you've predicted. And it is, I think, an opportunity for the population of the North East. I think it's a great opportunity, and I think it's up to the local people to make that option sustainable. I just want to ask, how is that going to be monitored, or how is that going to be considered in the longer term?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's a really important point, and certainly for me it's important we draw on your expertise, having as a doctor already set up and run one of these units. I think that we can make estimates about the number of ladies and the number of births we'll have per year, and we've done the best we can based on various modelling techniques. We've got a range of different options, but the key for us will be about creating a really positive sense of a vibrant unit that's at the heart of the community, and working with our key partners to do the best we possibly can to give that freestanding midwife-led unit a really, really vibrant future. And as you can see from the paper, there are many, many freestanding midwife-led units that are really successful around the country. The key, as I understand, tends to be about them being more than just a birth centre, that they connect the antenatal, the postnatal and broader elements of care, and also that they become kind of owned by the community, a really positive and vibrant opportunity for the community, I guess.
Sorry, Jeanette, next, and then...
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reinforce what Matt said. As a nurse myself, I think we would recognise that midwives have always been autonomous practitioners. There's a huge opportunity here for midwives to take that clinical leadership and actually develop a centre of excellence in South Tyneside in terms of a freestanding midwifery-led unit, accepting the issues that, you know, numbers may drop. It's actually up to the enthusiasm and commitment of the midwifery team and that leadership to promote that option to mothers, as long as it's safe for them to do so, to have that as their choice for a place of birth. So I do acknowledge that there's issues around sustainability, but that's in the gift of the people who are going to be leading on the development of that unit.
Thank you. I think Raj, you wanted to make a comment as well?
Thanks, Chair. My question is around, when you have a midwife-led unit and there are potential complications that you don't foresee that suddenly happen, there is obviously going to be more pressure on the ambulance services. Has this been discussed with the NIAS North East Ambulance Service?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a key concern for the public and for all governing body members. And NIAS have given us a very clear indication from Matthew Beattie, their medical director, on behalf of the board, that they're able to deliver the options that are set out in the paper. I think it's also worth noting that, as we've set out in here, the level of emergency transfers is actually very small relative to the births that we're expecting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question kind of in here. Hello? you hear me now? So my question builds on what you were saying about the staff, and it might be an opportunity for the midwives to take on the leadership. So has there been any feedback from the midwives on the proposed models, and have they been part of the co-development of the models?
I think, so certainly it's a clinically led design team, and the key for us is absolutely, as you say, about how we work with our midwifery colleagues. We've got some fantastic midwives in both South Tyneside and Sunderland, how we work with those teams to make sure this is a really vibrant, co-produced model, actually not just with staff but patients as well. We, governing body members, did request that staff were surveyed in terms of their appetite to work in an MLU, and unfortunately the trade union advised members of staff not to complete that survey. Even so, we did get, from the responses we had, sufficient to show that we can fulfil the rota for a midwifery-led unit, so there is appetite out there, absolutely.
Can I just... Will that freestanding midwifery unit, that will be a beacon of excellence, will it be available to all residents, Sunderland and South Tyneside? Will it be limited to South Tyneside, for example?
No, I think for the purpose of this consultation is about the residents of both South Tyneside and Sunderland. So I think, for me, we're talking about being based in South Tyneside District Hospital and being a hub of the community, but actually that's about the broader community. Right, indeed.
Anne, I think.
I just wanted to point out that I thought it was really helpful to see the table on page 43. I think you've just quickly referred to it, Matt. And that actually, if patients are risk assessed in line with best available evidence, and I know the maternity network supported that as well, we will be talking about very small numbers of patients who may require transfer, should that be an issue. And I just thought it was really positive to be offering women a choice that actually we don't currently have at the moment in terms of a midwifery-led unit. And as Matthew quite rightly says, there could be other people women from other areas who choose to use that service, which then could help with the longer-term sustainability.
Absolutely.
Check about, sorry, can you hear me? I'm assuming that with a freestanding midwifery unit, if there is indications where women are in labour and obstetric help is sought, or advice, will that be an immediate assumption that that would occur through the other at Sunderland Hospital, where the obstetric-led unit would be based? So would that just be a very clear link that would always be there?
Yeah, we would expect that. So you're getting a little bit of feedback, so I didn't quite catch the question, but we'd expect a very strong link between the two units, absolutely.
And in terms of sort of training and development as well, like although midwifery is a specialty complete in its own right, there's interdependencies with the obstetrics.
So throughout this, I think we'd expect that the teams work collectively to do the best they can for the local population. So absolutely, there's the appropriate supervision, training and oversight.
Fabulous, thank you.
Yeah, it was just to point out, during the consultation, I am a personal convert to this, so I had some safety concerns. I could hear the views of the patients. As many of you know, I was born in South Tyneside and lived there as well for a long period of time, so it was close to my heart. And I did have concerns about the safety in particular of midwifery-led units. I think for me, what I reflect back was the presentation in particular that we got from Professor Sturgis, which was really quite evidence-based and really robust. And what that presented to me was I could feel the feedback from the communities and the patients that was important to them. Yet I had the clinical doubt about, I had the sustainability, and I think we've still got that concern, we've had that aid, but I had clinical concerns as well. I think what he brought was an absolute clarity that elsewhere in the country this could be done. And I think if the governing bodies go with the recommendations as presented, it is absolutely essential that as a partnership between commissioners, providers and patients, we do commit to making this a centre of excellence, looking at best practice around the country and put 100% of our efforts into making this unit the best success it can be. And for me, as a convert to it, that's taken me on quite a journey. So I just wanted to hear the concerns. I've been there myself. I think as we go towards the recommendations, if we do that, I think we should realise it's in partnership to get such a unit to work at its best capacity. The impression I was clearly left under was it required a strong partnership between commissioners, providers and patients. So I just wanted to feed that back to both boards.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I would just like to add to that, and I agree with everything that Ian has said. I think there was a lot of scepticism and misperception about the safety of freestanding midwifery-led units at the start of this, and I think that has largely gone. I think the other powerful thing for me was an interaction that I saw at one of our consultation events between a midwife who has experience of working in an FMLU and their description of what care was like, which absolutely inspired the women who were in the audience. And I think that for me, that was the moment where I felt this is a great opportunity, and what we could be seeing here is a unit which is a real centre of excellence. So I agree with everything that Ian has said and more.
Colleagues, as final from Steve.
I think just as a final point, Chairman, I think it is important that we reinforce the commitment that we've had from the ambulance service. Firstly, the blue light point, that any transfer that's sought in an emergency will be treated as a blue light circumstance, minimal wait, minimal transfer time. And secondly, that the midwife-led unit will not be treated as a place of safety, and therefore it will always be regarded as having top priority. So I think that certainly helped me to come towards a view about the options, and I'm delighted that we've secured that commitment from NIAS.
I guess I was just going to reiterate the fact that we've had that commitment very clearly, and I was just going to reiterate the fact we've had that commitment very clearly in writing from NIAS, and also just go back to the earlier point in relation to Ian's very helpful comments, that the key thing for us in implementation, if we choose to support this option, will be that we do that really tight working with staff, with midwives, with patients, with the local community, with elected members, to give this the best chance we possibly can.
One final comment.
It was just a reflection. I think it always sounds strange when you say a place of safety, and it's not a place of safety. Yeah. I think it's just for board to understand that if a place is designated as a place of safety for NIAS, it means that you do not get an 8-minute response ambulance. So the fact that it is a safe place, but by not designating it a place of safety, it does actually mean that you get an 8-minute response as opposed to waiting much longer. So that's on this occasion for this unit. Remember, that is actually a good thing.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for clearing that. Okay, I think we're ready to move to the decision-making time for the obstetrics and gynecology proposals. So can I ask South Tyneside CCG governing body members if they're content to formally approve the recommendation of the paper, which for obstetrics and gynecology services to approve option 1 for implementation, option 1 being the development of the freestanding midwifery-led unit at South Tyneside Hospital and the medically-led obstetric unit at Sunderland Royal Hospital, noting that implementation will aim to be complete by April 2019. Colleagues, are you happy to endorse that recommendation? Okay, no dissenters, we'll note that and move to Ian.
Thank you, Chair. So similarly, for the governing body in Sunderland, we asked to formally approve the following recommendation. So for obstetrics and gynecology, to approve option 1 for implementation. Option 1 is the development of a freestanding midwifery-led unit at South Tyneside District Hospital, and also a medically-led obstetric unit at the Sunderland Royal Hospital, and to note the implementation will become complete by April 2019. Everybody happy with that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. It's now time for us to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the paediatrics, the urgent care for children. Matt, back to you to present the conclusions of the review so far.
And again, we'll look to take the same structure. So I'll set out the recommendation that we're making to the two governing bodies, run through some of the key points of rationale, and then come back to summarise the recommendation at the end. And I think it's important to note at the outset that this is the most complex in terms of the combination of options that we've come up with out of the 3 services we're consulting on. So for clarity, the recommendation to the two governing body members, of the 2 CCGs, is to approve option 2 for implementation as the most sustainable long-term model, but recognise that it will take a period of time for the requisite work to be done for this to be deliverable. And hence, we also need to approve option 1 for implementation in the short term. For absolute clarity, we're recommending that option 1 be approved as a transitionary step towards option 2. Option 1 is for a daytime paediatric emergency department at South Tyneside District Hospital and a 24/7 paediatric emergency department at Sunderland Royal Hospital. Option 1. Option 2 is the development of a nurse-led paediatric minor injury and illness facility at South Tyneside District Hospital and a 24/7 paediatric emergency department at Sunderland Royal. An additional option was put forward prior to public consultation by the paediatric consultant team at South Tyneside District Hospital, but this option failed to clear the hurdle criteria. And I think it's important to note that the option was also reviewed by the Northern England Clinical Senate specifically, which supported this pre-consultation decision not to take that option forward. It's also important to note that during the consultation period, a further transitional care SCABU model was proposed by staff and supported by the programme team as much as possible to be worked up for full consideration. That option is outlined on pages 46 to 48, but it did not pass the hurdle criteria, particularly given the feedback we've had from the Neonatal Network, NHS England Specialised Commissioners and the National Quality Surveillance Programme. External partners have been clear that they wouldn't expect this model of service to be considered as an alternative to SCABU level care. So the recommendation we're making is on the basis of all the evidence we considered throughout the process, but not least, that there are conflicting views about the preferred options across local clinical teams and external clinical partners, including the Northern Child Health Network and the Northern England Clinical Senate. The Northern Child Health Network noted that both options are credible attempts to address the significant workforce challenges, but that option 2 is most likely to support medical staff retention and deliver long-term workforce sustainability due to the concentration of paediatric acute emergency services. They identified no issues to question the safety and clinical efficacy of the proposals, and the view was that both options are in line with the available clinical evidence base and informed appropriately by clinical standards. The Northern England Clinical Senate noted that option 1 was the closest to being a workable solution and could potentially be implemented incrementally to build confidence in it. It noted that option 2 had unquantified risks that needed to be addressed. However, it's felt that these risks can be properly mitigated through taking a long-term approach to implementation, with option 1 as a transitionary model, as we set out. I think we should really note the Northern England Clinical Senate noted the passion of local medical and nursing teams for their populations and the care they deliver to their populations. And critically, the Northern England Clinical Senate noted the urgency of the decision we're making today, given the fragility of the service. While option 1 is more deliverable in the short term, it does not address the underlying issues relating to medical staffing that are the fundamental driver for change. And therefore, although option 2 will take longer to become deliverable, it's felt to be more sustainable in the long term, not least because it does address those medical staffing issues. Clearly, medical staffing concerns will mean paediatric services remain vulnerable throughout implementation. We've had suitable assurance from NIAS around patient transfers in the letter we've had back from Matthew Beattie on behalf of the board, and this guarantees the unit would not be regarded as a place of safety, much as Ian indicated earlier. Whilst the IIA, that's the Integrated Equality Health and Health Inequalities Impact Assessment, are positive for both options, the scoring is somewhat higher for option 1. The final IIA concludes that both proposed solutions have the potential to transform the provision of high-quality acute paediatric services, with all equality groups benefiting equally across Sunderland and South Tyneside, and also that both options have the potential to result in significant gains to population health and inequalities. In terms of the public engagement and consultation, again, we should note the comments that David made earlier that there was a strong sense of support for the status quo, but that was not considered an option. We noted that option 1 had greater support than option 2, and particular consideration has been given to the following. Opening hours. So there was a significant concern, both from staff and members of the public, about the proposed 8 p.m. finish time. We've worked that through with the programme team and clinical teams and revised that suggestion, and we're now proposing the unit stays open until 10 p.m. under either option. In terms of the clinical model, particular concerns were noted about the ability of the adult emergency department team at South Tyneside District Hospital to deal with paediatric issues out of hours. It is clear there'll be a need to ensure there's sufficient paediatric life support skills, training and refreshers to manage this under implementation of either option. But this is not an uncommon model, and paediatrics is a core element of emergency medicine training. In terms of communication, we clearly noted the need to communicate any change in service to the people of South Tyneside and Sunderland, and the need for a clear communication and engagement strategy is self-evident. Travel, again, was a key concern. We noted there'd be a travel impact for South Tyneside patients under both options, although potentially significantly less under option 1, and that there's a great deal of work underway to help mitigate this, as I've noted earlier in the paper. We noted again that key assurance had been received from NIAS in terms of the deliverability of the options, not least with respect to transfer patients and place safety. Just to recap the recommendation, we're recommending that the governing body members of South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs approve option 2 for implementation as the most sustainable long-term model, but recognise that it will take a period of time for the requisite work to be done for this to be deliverable, and hence also approve option 1 for implementation in the short term. For clarity, We're recommending that option 1 is approved as a transitionary step towards option 2. It's recommended that the governing body members of South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs support the proposed amendment to opening hours under each option from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. as the closing time. And governing body members of South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs are asked to note implementation of option 1 will aim to be complete by April 2019 as a transitionary step. Implementation of option 2 should include an external group to review the transition and proceed at an appropriate pace over the medium term for likely completion and aim to be complete by April 2021.
Colleagues around the table, questions or comments? Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Really speaking as a parent who over the years has taken all of my children to emergency departments at various times through various adventures, I really want to be assured about the situation, which is that you're a parent with a very poorly child. You go to the first available place. The custom and practice has been you take it to South Tyneside, so the people of this area. If they arrive there with a very sick child that needs urgent, immediate attention after the hours that the option 1 premises are open, what happens to the child? How are they then treated? I heard the remarks that Matt was making, but I really want to understand, what does a parent do? They bring their child there. I would sincerely expect they're not going to be told, sorry, you need to go to Sunderland, but they will be looked after.
We'll see if Matt can provide assurance of that. I don't think you may wish to ask Dr Wahid to comment as Medical Director of the South Tyneside Trust as well, Matt.
I think I can only take the answer to that question so far, and not being clinician, so it might be helpful if Dr Wahid is able to just expand on that a little bit.
So I think, as Matt has outlined, I think it's very important we have a communication strategy so that doesn't happen. However, if it does happen, it's important we will not be turning children away, and the aim is we'll have an accident emergency there, they will be stabilised, and as we've already heard, indeed, no hospital is not just, and NIAS have given the commitment, no hospital is a place of safety. And even more importantly, if NIAS get a call from a health professional, they will, and the health professional says this child needs to go immediately, that will not be questioned either. So we will have resuscitative facilities, we will be able to stabilise the child, give the appropriate emergency treatment, but then immediately transfer to the paediatric ED in Sunderland, or in some cases they need to actually go to the Great North Hospital, depending what their circumstances are.
Thank you. And just as a clarification, the doctors in the emergency accident and emergency department, other hospitals don't have paediatric departments, they simply have an emergency department. So I presume doctors, clearly as part of their training, are conscious of the special needs of children.
Absolutely. So all the emergency medicine doctors are trained in advanced paediatric life support. They are well versed in trauma and injury as well, so they can stabilise that as part of their training. They can stabilise emergency in patients who have life-threatening conditions so that it can be transferred.
Thank you very much. Tobin.
Just wanted to clarify, if the unit shut at 10, when would the last child be admitted?
I think it's important to reiterate there's that 2-hour window till midnight, so that the last child will be admitted. The door shut at 10 o'clock, but that gives us an opportunity to start planning whether to discharge a child or make those phone calls through NIAS and communicate with a relevant ED or short stay assessment unit that this child needs transferring off to that unit. So yeah, the doors close at 10 o'clock. However, we will deal with all children who are in the department at that time. In fact, a lot of that dealing will be happening as a rolling basis. We won't wait till 10 o'clock to make that decision whether the child is transferring or not.
Thank you.
Do you have any concerns about the retention of the paediatric nursing staff during the transition period?
I think we're very lucky at the moment that nursing staff retention is very good. I think we mustn't forget that at the moment our actual unit runs very well because we have advanced paediatric nurse practitioners. When we did the consultation a number of years ago in 2012, the whole model really was built on making sure that we have not just paediatric nurse practitioners, but advanced paediatric nurse practitioners. They bring something, skills which allows us to actually manage the majority of our children locally, hence why we need to build this cadre of nursing staff to support the long-term sustainability because of the medical staffing issues we have.
Okay, thank you. Derek.
Forgive me if I've already had this question answered because I'm having difficulty hearing the echo in the room, but the question for me is that these options all require a unified staff between the two trusts, and can you explain how that practically will be delivered?
I think every service review, the number one aim is to have the same staff across all units. We have that with obstetrics and gynecology. I think that was alluded to previously as well, around the midwife. This will be one team delivering care for South Tyneside and Sunderland residents. Once whatever decision is made, I think a lot of that integration will happen. But it's like everything, we need to do it sensitively. There has to be culture changes, etc. But a lot of that discussion, a lot of that building teams together has already begun. But it's like any change, some people will want to be part of that team, some people may not want to be part of that team, may want to get off the bus, as they say, but ultimately we need to have one team. Because of the numbers, it gives us that much more sustainability, and that's the common thread, the golden thread, just going through all the service reviews.
Thank you.
Roger.
The question is also about staff numbers. Obviously, this is going to put pressure on or at least Sunderland Hospital will see more kids than they're currently seeing with this midwifery-led care. So do we have enough staff numbers at Sunderland to cope with the additional workload?
So, absolutely, yes. I think that's built into our workload. In fact, Sunderland's maternity use is built to cope with 4,000 births. And the staff numbers, I think we mustn't reiterate, I think if we have the one team, there'll be enough medical staff to actually cope with the numbers and cope with the single rota. Trying to maintain two rotas delivering the same care is proving a big issue at the moment around maternity, so and very similar around paediatrics.
Paediatrics is the issue at play here, Dr. Wade. So we have enough staff across paediatrics to cover any extra children going to Sunderland.
And again, with option one, I think that's been factored into our transition. And when we start, if this in the transition model, we will have to have a firm working group to actually make sure that when we're working towards option two, we have the same number of staff to cope, because the numbers of children going across the paediatric ED will increase. However, I think we'll be giving ourselves time to communicate with our local population. As alluded to, I think there's a fair proportion of our children who come to our ED at the moment which actually probably can have their care better delivered in the community or through a minor injuries unit. So I think we've given ourselves time to go towards modernising more care closer to home, so those numbers, trying to minimise the numbers going that need actually life-threatening conditions
so
managed.
The proposed step model of implementation makes it easier from a staffing point of view longer term to get this happening.
Absolutely.
Okay. Tracy?
Hi. I was interested in both options. It makes clear that there is scope to provide more subspecialist paediatric clinics in an outpatient setting, and I don't think that's really been drawn out of this discussion so far. So is that something that our South Tyneside patients do not currently have for children with some long-term conditions?
So yeah, I think we have paediatric diabetes services, we have community paediatric services, but we don't have dedicated epilepsy or dedicated gastroenterology or dedicated asthma clinics as such, although we are building asthma clinics. And because you're going to have the one team across both, it gives us an opportunity to attract staff who can do emergency care whilst at the same time developing their specialist skills, and also allows us to actually deliver that more specialist care closer to home as well.
Deliver those services locally within South Tyneside?
Working as one team, yes.
Fabulous, thank you.
Thank you. Dave?
when you were talking to the paper, you mentioned that this was one of the more complex areas, and I think it's fair to say from the feedback we've had in the consultation, it's one of the more emotive areas as well. So I think the staged approach sounds quite a pragmatic way forward to actually reach a solution. Just in the recommendations, we're being asked to actually include an independent external review group to get from stage 1 to stage 2. I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more so we understand what that means, please.
So I think it's particularly about working with partners such as the networks, the Northern England Clinical Centre and the Child Health Network who've given us their views here. It's about getting that expertise to make sure we can guarantee to ourselves that it's safe moving forward. I think also it's about having the staff group working very squarely as part of that to make sure that they feel equally confident. So I guess it's building on that work, and we need to take that forward through the implementation process.
Thank you.
As a lay member, I've noted the reports from the Child Health Network and the Northern English Clinical Senate, and their reports appear to be very comprehensive. But I'm just fascinated, why are those responses important to us, and to what extent have their comments and recommendations affected our judgment or thinking for the way forward?
I see both itching to answer, but
and I think it's a general issue around process. I think these are the expert groups. They're the leaders regionally, they're the leaders nationally. You heard about maternity. It's the same process. It's important we get their views so that the models we develop are, more importantly, safe but sustainable as well. And I think the fact that you've got two, I would say, rather esteemed bodies giving generally different opinions just shows the difficulty in this area, specifically around paediatrics. But one thing they clearly have made clear is that actually staying the same is not an option. I think something needs to change in how we deliver paediatric care going forwards.
Anything to add to that, Matt?
No, I mean, I think that covers it. For me, it's about getting those regional and national clinical experts to give us the level of expertise and assurance about safety, quality and sustainability. So that's the key thing for me.
Anything further from colleagues around the table? Do you want to word, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right to highlight that this is a more complex issue than maybe the other two. The workforce issues seem to me the ones that are really going to underpin these solutions. So what we heard, I think, from the clinicians was that the consultant paediatric workforce issues and the middle grade issues are not going to go away anytime in the foreseeable future. So I think that's why we've had to go for what the recommendation is, which is a staged approach. But it is underpinned by the fact that I don't see anyone saying there is going to be a consultant and middle grade workforce change that would be able to allow us to make a different recommendation other than one that's suggested. So it is more complex. It is worth noting that.
And I think although the Clinical Centre and the Child Health Network have different views on some of the ways to implement solutions, actually they're both very clear and consistent on that particular point. And I think also on the opportunity to use technology and other things to make sure we get the right level of supervision through both options.
Okay. Colleagues, I don't see any further questions or comments being requested. So can we move to the formal decision making regarding the paediatric services options? And South Tyneside governing body members, can I ask if you're content to formally approve the recommendation being to approve option 2 for implementation as the most sustainable long-term model, but recognising it will take a period of time for the requisite work to be done for this to be deliverable. Therefore, the governing body are asked to also approve option 1 for implementation in the short term. So for clarity, that approving option 1 as a transitory step towards option 2. Option 1 is for a daytime paediatric emergency department at South Tyneside District Hospital and a 24/7 paediatric emergency department at Sunderland Royal Hospital. Option 2 is the development of a nurse-led paediatric minor injury and illness facility at South Tyneside District Hospital and a 24/7 paediatric emergency department at Sunderland Royal Hospital. Are you content to recommend governing bodies that you support the proposed amendment to opening hours under each option from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. as the closing time? And are you content to note that implementation of option 1 will aim to be complete by April 2019 as a transitionary step? and that implementation of option 2 should include an independent external group to review the transition and proceed at an appropriate pace over the medium term for likely completion by April 2021. All content, South Tyneside Governing Body members, to agree with that recommendation? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And over to Sunderland. Now again. So the Sunderland CCG Board asked to formally approve the following recommendation for paediatric services: to approve option 2 for the implementation as the most sustainable long-term model, but recognise it will take a period of time for the requisite work to be done for this to be deliverable. Therefore, the governing body is asked to approve option 1 for implementation in the short term. For clarity, it is recommended that option 1 be approved as a transitionary step towards option 2. Option 1 is for a daytime paediatric emergency department at South Tyneside District Hospital and a 24/7 paediatric emergency department at Sunderland Royal Hospital. Option 2 is the development of a nurse-led paediatric minor injury and illness facility at South Tyneside District Hospital and a 24/7 paediatric emergency department at the Sunderland Royal Hospital. It is recommended that the governing body support the proposed amendment to opening hours under each of those options from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. as the closing time. To note, implementation of option 1 will aim to be completed by April 2019 as a transitionary step. Implementation of option 2 should include an independent external group to review the transition and proceed to an appropriate pace over the medium term, likely for completion by April 2021. I'll take that to everybody happy to approve the recommendation. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the final of the 3 service areas that we're looking at today. Matt, I think you can talk us through the paper regarding stroke services.
So I'll go straight into the recommendation and I'll summarise some of the key points of rationale behind making that recommendation before coming back to the recommendation again. It's recommended that governing body members of South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs approve option 1 for implementation. Option 1 is that all acute strokes are directed to Sunderland Royal Hospital with the consolidation of all inpatient stroke care at Sunderland Royal Hospital. The recommendation is made on the basis of all the evidence we've considered throughout this process, but not least that a clear preference for option 1 was expressed by the local clinical team as the most likely to deliver best quality. And when we talk about quality here, we're talking about fewer deaths and less life-limiting disability for patients suffering strokes. There was unequivocal support for option 1 over options 2 and 3 given by the Northern Cardiovascular Disease Network and the National Clinical Director for Stroke. And the key issue really is about the likelihood of recruiting sufficient medical and therapy staff across 2 different sites under the other options to enable sufficient competencies. There is a substantial difference in favour of option 1 in the IIA. That's the Independent Integrated Equality Health and Health Inequalities Impact Assessment. Indeed, both options 2 and 3 scored negatively on that under stroke, which is the only service area where there were negative scores. There are strongly positive impacts of change for the populations of both CCGs and particularly for vulnerable communities. However, a number of considerations were set out for us in the IIA, such as the need for clear campaigns and communication with the public, prevention programmes for stroke, working particularly with primary care, the need for suitable oversight, and the travel and transport implications that we've talked through previously. Option 1 is the most likely to deliver the greatest improvement in quality and safety for both populations, building on the substantial increase that we can see demonstrably through the SNAP scores, that's the Stroke Sentinel National Audit Programme scores, for South Tyneside patients since the temporary relocation of services in December 2016. I draw your attention to page 15 of the document, the decision-making report, where we can see there's been dramatic improvements in terms of the SNAP scores and hence patient care for the people of South Tyneside since that temporary change. In the years before the change, we can see that no South Tyneside patients were thrombolised within an hour, and that figure is now around 2/3, 63% or so. I think it's important to note at this point that we haven't fully implemented option 1. It's been the temporary relocation of services since December 2016. So in particular, there would be, if we chose to support this option, there would be much more work to do in terms of the nurse practitioner and therapist support. And I think we should note that there have been no issues with capacity. So on page 73, you'll note that 90% of patients for both South Tyneside and Sunderland CCGs had more than 90% of their stay on a stroke unit since the temporary change. It's considered that consolidation of the workforce in this way is most likely to deliver sustainable services and most likely to enable future recruitment and retention of clinicians as stroke becomes increasingly specialised. I think we should note that in the public engagement and consultation, option 1 again had broad support, but we did give particular consideration to the following feedback. Delay in treatment was a key concern for members of the public. So it seemed perverse to be suggesting that it would drive past the door of one hospital to another. But I think it's really important that the evidence is absolutely clear. The key is timely transport to the right hospital, and a hospital able to deliver excellent, consistent, hyperacute stroke care, rather than just any hospital. The evidence is really clear on that point, and we heard that very strongly throughout the governing body workshops we've had in the time to date. We heard concerns from members of the public about capacity at Sunderland Royal Hospital, but again I draw your attention to page 73 of the document, where you can see that at least 90% of stroke patients have spent at least 90% of their stay on a stroke unit, and that applies to both South Tyneside and Sunderland residents since the temporary relocation in December 2016. Members of the public were concerned about the increase in travel for South Tyneside residents, particularly for visitors to stroke patients. And we noted that all of these options require South Tyneside patients to be directed to Sunderland Royal Hospital in the first instance, but the patients would stay longer at Sunderland Royal under option 1. However, the clinical benefits of consolidation of the workforce were felt to be so strong that they outweighed that increased time. We also noted there's a significant amount of work underway through that travel and transport stakeholder group with a broad range of partners seeking to address and mitigate the issues that we've identified with travel and transport. There were some specific concerns about transient ischemic attack, TIA clinics, but we noted that there wouldn't be any change to the current service under this model. We'd still be looking to treat as many patients at South Tyneside as possible. And there were some concerns that were raised by members of the public about repatriation itself under options 2 and 3, that actually repatriation could hamper recovery in having an extra step in the process, if you like. So having considered all that, the recommendation that we're making to governing body members of both CCGs is to approve option 1 for implementation. Option 1 is that all acute strokes are directed to Sunderland Royal Hospital with the consolidation of all inpatient stroke care at Sunderland Royal Hospital. Governing body members are asked to note implementation will aim to be complete by April 2019.
The issues regarding stroke care, Matt. Can I ask for questions or comments from colleagues around the table?
I have a question about transport, which really figures in all of these services, but guessing that stroke patients are probably going to be the highest number and having the longest inpatient stay. We've had a very detailed report on the transport issues, both for car drivers and for those having to use public transport. And we all know that being visited by family and friends is conducive to good support during your recovery time. So I just wondered, given all the information that we've had, suggestions from the public about buses between the two hospitals, park and ride facilities, and how we can possibly influence that as CCGs? Yeah,
and clearly public transport is not under the direct remit of the organisations, but we can have a strong influence over that. And in fact, that travel and transport stakeholder group has seen some really positive action come through, work with the local authorities, with Nexus, with the bus companies, with the elected members, and with the user groups of those services. I think although the suggestion of a specific bus between the two hospital sites has been proposed in a consultation, that group is of the view that it's not a sensible option, given that actually we want to transport patients from where they live, rather than from between two hospital sites on the whole. There's an appendix to the decision-making report which sets out a number of the key tasks that group has set out to address some of those travel and transport concerns. So in terms of coordinating communications and marketing, in terms of mapping and leaflets, which may seem like a small thing, but it's about making sure that patients have got absolutely the right specific information to understand how best to travel between different sites. Really driving much better personalised journey planning. There's lots of work looking at discounted staff travel tickets, new patient and visitor travel tickets, and particularly some of the bus stop information and bus information displays in hospitals. And particularly working with the Trust on travel planning resources to help patients and visitors be have much more systematic and streamlined information about how to get between sites. That document is sent as an appendix, and I think it's important to note that the work will continue through that implementation phase with whichever option that the governing bodies choose to proceed. But we recognise it's really important, and each individual patient and family any additional travel is a key concern.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to draw attention to the table on page 83, and just to highlight that we had considerable discussion around the issues with discharge process and recognising that repatriation to South Tyneside was something that we recognised needed to be very well managed, because we didn't want any delays in people being discharged. So it was really just to highlight that that has been recognised, and that work will need to start to be undertaken around how that process is implemented.
Thank you. Raj and Ellie.
Hi, Matt, this is about the TIA clinics. I know you briefly mentioned about that in your report. So we're talking about high-risk and low-risk TIA clinics. For the public, it's TIA is a mini stroke. So clearly, this is more than a question, it is a comment. So GPs, again, you know, for GPs, generally a TIA is a TIA. So there has to be a very clear communication there with general practitioners, particularly what you classify as a high risk and what you classify as a low risk. So that's more of a comment. With regards to the low risk, is it that run by nurse practitioners? Is that what it's expected to be, stroke nurse practitioners running the low risk TIA clinics at South Tyneside?
So I'll have to look for specifically who runs the clinics. I'll have to look for colleagues from South Tyneside FT. But certainly we've confirmed throughout the process that there isn't really any change to the TIA clinics through this. But I think you make a very important point that part of the implementation consideration and the broader considerations for the CCG in terms of its population health duties is working with GPs to help understand those kind of preventative and primary and early secondary prevention kind of measures that we need to take.
I think it's important to make the point that high-risk TIAs already go to Sunderland, so that communication has happened with GPs in South Tyneside. There's a scoring system, but if they attend our accident emergency, they are scored, they're high risk, there's a system to get them seen at Sunderland, because that's the national guidance. In fact, that guidance is going to be changed shortly as well, where even moderate risk TIAs would have to be seen in a special setup and get emergency scans, etc., for a number of hours. It's really the low risk TIAs which will remain at South Tyneside, and you know, from that aspect, but there has to be clear communication again. But to be fair, we've been doing that since through the temporary model, and there've been the odd hiccup here and there, but the pathway has been utilised very successfully.
Thank you. That's reassuring. Thank you.
And Aileen?
Thanks, Matt. I wanted to ask about the SNAP data. In the document, the last data we've got is August, November 20, and I appreciate why, but as a lay member, I just want assurance that we actually are seeing an improvement, and we expect that next data to be significantly improved.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been waiting on tender hooks for the next edition of the data to come out. I'm not sure if I think the draft might be out, but certainly by March we should have the next set of data. I think, as Matt has reiterated, what we have not done is implemented option 1 as the temporary measure. But what the teams have done, I think, because they've worked as a single team, they've implemented a change in August last year, put an extra nurse practitioner in to pull patients more through the emergency department more quicker, and we hope to see that reflected in the SNAP data.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Carl Fickle and Derek.
Raj, just answering a question about TIAs or mini strokes. As you know, we already have the temporary model running in Sunderland, and as Dr. Wahid said, the high-risk mini stroke TIA clinics are happening in Sunderland, and the low-risk TIA mini stroke clinics happen every day, 24 hours in South Tyneside. But I just wanted to comment on the data, the SNAP data Eileen suggested. The option 1 that has been recommended has been the temporary model for 6 months or longer. Is it maybe a year or
December 20th?
And we can see the data, the national data. You can see a very, very clear positive outcome for South Tyneside residents. And as a doctor, firsthand we see the devastating effects of not getting a stroke patient into an hyperacute unit, and also getting the right therapy for the first initial few days. It's crucial. The recovery they have in the first few days is, you cannot overemphasize that, and the devastation we see because of lack of those services is just lifelong. And you can see that very clearly, in one of the tables, it was 50% for South Tyneside residents, and it's nearly 90% for, in the last year or so. It's just very important to focus on that, but also the therapy part of it. As Eileen suggested, we must make sure that because of the extra pressure in Sunderland, because of these patients coming in, we have to make sure that the therapy part of it doesn't dip, because that's very important to maintain as well.
I'm sure that's part
yeah,
of the
that's
implementation plan. Isn't it?
Part of the implementation plan.
I guess I would just say, and certainly for South Tyneside residents, you can see in the paper that there's been a substantial increase. But we all want the best for our communities, for the patients we serve, so we expect to see it continue to increase. We expect performance for both South Tyneside and Sunderland patients to be at a much higher level over the coming months. So it's a good step in the right direction, and we'd expect to see that really increase with implementation of that option.
Okay, I think one final comment from Dr. Cross. Who,
Thanks, Matt. So I guess I'm thinking about the other end of the pathways, so the hyperacute stuff and the initial rehabilitation is really important, but as a geriatrician I know that some rehabilitation can be very prolonged, and we've had it assured, we just want to be sure that we've got the ability to repatriate South Tyneside residents to a bed closer to home when it may be beneficial to them, whether that's an intermediate care bed or an inpatient bed or whatever, just to be a bit more patient-centred.
Yeah, I think it's important that they are repatriated into a community setting. I think and one of the challenges we give our team is that the clinical team strongly believe that we should not fragment that care, and if we repatriate them too early into a hospital at South Tyneside because they're closer to home, that will have a detrimental impact clinically. But you're absolutely right. I think that once the model is implemented, they will look at the community teams working closer together. We'll look at different models of care, etc., to make sure that community repatriation, as Jeanette has said, happens quicker.
Okay, thank you. One final one, Derek. Go on then.
Given that the option one is the favoured option, and that's been partially implemented since December 2016, is there a reason why it's going to take till April 19 to fully implement?
I think April 19 is our line in the sand. I think that we'll hopefully get things implemented earlier than that. A lot of the implementation is around the therapy staff, etc., so there might be a bit of recruitment, etc., to make from that aspect. And then, as alluded to, it's important we look at the community pathway, we look at the whole pathway. So it might be that April 19 might well be the opportunity for us to review the acute and the community pathway together.
Okay.
I think we should also note that following the conclusion of this process, there are other consultative regulatory processes that we may have to go through, legal processes. So it's just to really reflect that in some ways.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. I think it's time that we need to move to decision making for this this area of service now. So South Tyneside CCG governing body members, can I ask if you're all content to approve the recommended option 1 for implementation? So that is that all strokes, acute strokes, are directed to Sunderland Royal Hospital with the consolidation of all inpatient stroke care at Sunderland Royal Hospital, and noting the implementation will aim to be complete by April 2019. Happy and content? No dissenters? We'll carry that. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. So over to Sunderland. So the same recommendation. So the governing body of Sunderland CCG is asked to formally approve the recommendation for stroke service, and that is to approve option 1 for implementation. Option 1 is that all acute stroke services are directed to the Sunderland Royal Hospital with the consolidation of all inpatient stroke care at the Royal Hospital. To note, implementation will aim to be complete by April 2019. Everybody happy with the recommendation? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Matt, I don't know, we have an item on the agenda as next steps. I don't know if there's anything that you wish to comment around that before we move on and close the meeting.
So it's just briefly then to note, from following this meeting, we'll need to communicate the decisions that the organisations have made out to our key partners and statutory stakeholders. And in section 9, page 83, we've set out a number of considerations for implementation we'll need to take into account. I think there are some that are not entirely reflected in here, so we talked about those groups to work with the freestanding midwife-led unit and oversight of the transitionary model for paediatrics that will need to be added into here. So it'll be about working into implementation in line with the timescales we set out in the paper.
Thank you very much.
Yes, regarding the implementation process, I would be seeking assurance that we will put together teams of the clinicians, the CCGs, patients, public, and other bodies to ensure that we really do follow a path to excellence and that we do establish the necessary procedures and protocols that will, in fact, delight our patients, because that's the whole point. And I think it's very important that we don't just say, well, so over to you, get on with it. We've got to do it collectively.
I don't think anyone's going to argue with that.
Okay.
Final marks, Aileen?
Sorry, can I just ask a general question related to Jeff's in a way? The document talks a lot about medical staff and medical students, but it really doesn't talk a lot about nurses, midwives and the allied professions. So really, I'm seeking assurance that we're going to be able to support those staff, very much as Jeff's just talked about the implementation of this, but just generally supporting them if they're having to take on new roles and responsibilities, and perhaps even additional qualifications.
That's an absolutely essential part of the implementation of this process and moving forward. And it's not just about the sort of technical, clinical aspects, it's about how we support our staff to take on leadership roles in moving some of these things forward, isn't it? So, yeah, I completely agree and would certainly seek that assurance, work with the Trust to make sure that's delivered.
Thank you, colleagues. There being no items of other business that need to be addressed, it falls to me now to bring this meeting to a close. During this whole process, there's been dedicated work and support from a wide range of NHS staff, officers, doctors, nurses, support from local authority officers and elected members, community and voluntary sector organisations, and a very positive response from new partners such as the bus companies and Nexus. One major benefit of this process has been bringing these people together to allow us to form new working partnerships and relationships which we hope will strengthen, continue to break down organisational and institutional barriers to develop our health system, putting the needs of our shared population at the heart of it. I would like to sincerely thank everyone who's contributed and played a part in helping with this very important NHS reform. It certainly has not been easy, but we must not forget the very compelling reasons for the changes. As you know, I'm a GP, and today with the decisions that we have made, we will have saved more people's lives than I've done on any other day in my medical career so far. I would finally and most importantly like to thank the people of South Tyneside and Sunderland who took the time to consider the issues, contribute their views over the past 20 months. And to all of you who have attended today and contributed to the consultation process, challenged us when necessary as part of a robust decision-making process. It's the information that you have provided to us that's helped us make the best decision we can today in order to make the changes needed to ensure these valuable services can become strong and vibrant services, providing the top quality care we know our NHS staff want to deliver for all of their patients. We hope that local people will continue to engage positively in NHS reform over the coming months and years. As we celebrate our NHS's 70th birthday this year, it's decisions like the ones we've made today that will ensure our NHS continues to grow and ensure it is secure as the national treasure it truly is, providing free and safe care for our children, grandchildren and generations to come. Thank you, and the meeting now is closed.
Thank you.